But Alex,
Pa kayo saan?
from Bodensee. So, may
Bodensee. Ilang oras yung biyahe?
3 to 4.
Ilang buwan na yung...
A woman, 7 months pregnant, wakes up one morning, looks at a tennis tournament draw, and decides she's getting in a car. Not for a final. Not for a semi-final. A first-round match on a Tuesday afternoon on clay in Stuttgart, Germany. She drives nearly 4 hours to get there, settles into her seat in that arena, and the moment Alex walks out, she starts cheering. That image alone tells you everything you need to know about what kind of athlete we're dealing with here, because nobody does that for someone they casually like. Nobody puts their body through that for a player they're just following from a distance. That trip, that decision, that commitment, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from something Alex has been quietly building for a long time, something that has very little to do with rankings and everything to do with who she actually is. And Stuttgart, on April 14, 2026, put all of it on full display in a way that was impossible to ignore. So let's talk about it properly, because this story deserves more than a headline. Alex walked into the Porsche Tennis Grand Prix at 20 years old, in the middle of one of the most demanding stretches on the women's calendar. Indoor clay is its own kind of beast. It's heavy and slow, and it punishes impatience in a way that outdoor clay doesn't quite replicate. You can't just muscle your way through points. You have to grind, you have to trust the process, you have to build rallies that sometimes feel like they're going nowhere before they finally crack something open. For a player who has spent a lot of her development on faster surfaces, that transition is real work. It doesn't happen overnight. It asks you to rewire instincts you've spent years building, and that is genuinely hard. Alex came to Stuttgart with preparation behind her. Sandro Vien was there. Joan Bosch had been working with her on clay adaptation in the weeks leading up to the tournament. The groundwork was laid. The intention was serious. But preparation can only carry you so far when the draw lands you across the net from someone like Leylah Fernandez on day one. Fernandez is not an easy opener for anyone. She stood at the edge of a Grand Slam final and competed like someone who belonged there. She knows how to handle pressure from the inside and knows how to read a moment and respond to it rather than react to it. She is, by every measure, a genuinely dangerous first-round opponent. And then there's the other layer to this matchup, the one that exists completely outside rankings and statistics. Fernandez has Filipino roots. So you had two women, both shaped by the same cultural thread, standing across a net from each other in the middle of Europe, while a crowd that had traveled across borders was chanting one name and holding flags and making a European tennis venue feel like something it had never quite been before. That is not a normal Tuesday in Germany. The crowd inside the Porsche Arena that afternoon was something else entirely. It didn't feel like a neutral venue. It felt like a gathering, like a community had collectively decided that this particular building, on this particular afternoon, belonged to them. Filipino fans showed up with flags, with noise, with full hearts and full voices, and they reorganized the energy of that entire arena just by being present. You could feel it in the clips that circulated afterward. You could see it in the way the room responded when Alex appeared. The Porsche Grand Prix has hosted some of the biggest names in women's tennis for years, and yet on that day, the gravitational center of the entire event was a 20-year-old who had never played there before. That's what she does. That's the pull she has created, and Stuttgart made it impossible to look away from. Now let's go back to the woman in the car for a second, because her story deserves to sit with you a little longer. 7 months pregnant means every hour in a vehicle is a negotiation. Your body at that stage is not subtle about what it needs and what it doesn't want. And she looked at that draw, saw Alex's name in the first round, and made a deliberate decision that 4 hours on a German highway was worth it. Not impulsive. Not emotional in a way that overrides reason. Deliberate. She thought it through and concluded that being in that room, being one of the voices in that arena, mattered more than the physical cost of getting there. She also didn't go alone. She brought a friend, and they drove through Germany together, and when they arrived, they found other Filipinos already waiting. Already there. Already ready. There is something about that detail that gets right to the heart of what Alex has built, because you don't get that kind of response by accident. You get it by being someone worth showing up for and then by actually showing up yourself every single time the moment asks something of you. The match began, and the scoreboard told its truth clearly. The first set went 6-1 to Fernandez. On that surface, against a player of that caliber, losing an opener that decisively is a test that separates players very quickly. A lot of 20-year-olds in that position would let the second set dissolve quietly. They'd still be on the court, still going through the motions, but something would have shifted behind the eyes, a kind of quiet surrender that the crowd can always sense even when the player is still swinging. Alex didn't do that. The second set went 6-4, still Fernandez, but the gap between those two sets is where the Real story lies. She made Fernandez work. She made her earn every single game. She gave the crowd something to stay loud for, and they stayed loud. Not because they were winning, but because they were watching someone compete when competing was genuinely hard. There is a real difference between cheering for a winner and cheering for a competitor, and everyone inside that arena understood exactly which one they were doing. The fans who had rearranged their lives to be there, who had crossed borders and driven through the night and shown up 7 months pregnant, they didn't leave that building feeling cheated. They left feeling confirmed. Because what they came to see wasn't whether Alex would win. It was who she is when the match is heavy, when the surface is unfamiliar, when the score is working against her, and the easy thing would be to let it go. She showed them. She fought through it. She stayed in it. And when the match ended, she didn't retreat. She didn't disappear into the tunnel and process everything behind closed doors. She stayed out there. Signed autographs. Took photos. Gave the people who had traveled for her the part of herself that the match had temporarily kept at a distance, the genuine human connection that fans feel but rarely get to actually touch. You can absorb a loss when the bond you showed up for turns out to be real the moment the competition ends. She gave them that, fully and without hesitation. But here's where the story takes a turn that elevates it past the familiar narrative of devoted fans rallying around a rising player. Because the most powerful thing that happened in Stuttgart that day didn't come from the crowd. It came from across the net. Leylah Fernandez, having just closed out a match loaded with emotion and cultural weight and an arena full of noise that was mostly pointed at her opponent, could have talked about anything. Her game, her preparation, what the win meant for her clay season. Instead, she talked about Alex. She said Alex doesn't go down easily. That you can see the fight in her. That you're going to have to take that match, because she is not handing it to you. Sit with what it means for those words to come from that specific person in that specific moment. Fernandez isn't a pundit. She isn't a fan with a microphone. She is the player who spent 90 minutes on the other side of that net, feeling every point Alex made her play for in that second set. She had every professional reason to keep the focus on herself, and instead she chose to say out loud that Alex is the kind of opponent you have to go take, not wait out. That is not politeness. That is recognition from the one person whose opinion on this topic carries the most weight, because she earned it by actually competing against her. Fernandez also described the match as something close to facing a mirror, two players with shared roots and similar competitive instincts, a relationship to the sport that runs through the same cultural veins. That detail adds something important, because it means the respect she offered wasn't a generic compliment handed out at a post-match press conference. It was specific. It was personal. She saw something in Alex that she recognized, and she named it out loud, and that changed the meaning of everything that happened that afternoon. Now zoom out from the match entirely and look at what Stuttgart actually represented in the bigger picture. A diaspora turned a European tennis venue into a cultural gathering point. Filipino supporters didn't negotiate for that space. They didn't ask permission or wait to see if it felt right. They showed up with flags and voices and full commitment and made the room theirs simply by being present in numbers that couldn't be ignored. There's no campaign behind that. No coordinated promotion or marketing strategy. Just a community that decided their person was worth the trip and then took the trip. That is soft power in its most organic, unmanufactured form, and it has consequences that reach far beyond one first-round result in Germany. Because the clay season doesn't stop in Stuttgart. It moves to Madrid, then Rome, then Paris, Roland Garros, the biggest clay stage in the sport. And every one of those stops now carries a question that didn't exist before that Tuesday afternoon. Not just how will Alex perform on clay as she continues to develop on this surface, but how loud can her people make the next room feel? Stuttgart answered whether the support would travel. The answer came back without hesitation. Yes. Even across borders. Even through 4 hours of German highway. Even 7 months pregnant. Alex spoke about this in Stuttgart, and what she said is worth slowing down for. She described her Filipino fans as creating something electric wherever she plays, something that makes foreign soil feel like home. Think about that phrase for a second. Foreign soil is supposed to feel foreign. That's the entire point of the expression. Distance and unfamiliarity are real forces, and they wear on people, especially on a grueling international tour where you're navigating new cities and new surfaces and the relentless grind of professional tennis week after week. But she described the opposite of that experience. Not because the match was easy, not because Stuttgart somehow felt like Manila, but because her people found her and made the room feel like home anyway. The woman in the car was part of that. Every flag, every chant, every person who showed up with their whole heart on a Tuesday afternoon in Germany was part of that. They weren't just expressing support. They were building shelter. And that does something real for a player grinding through a demanding surface transition in the middle of a European clay swing. The full picture of Stuttgart is this. Alex lost 6-1, 6-4. The clay transition is ongoing and real, and the opening set showed that clearly. Nothing softens that. But the complete story of that day doesn't live only on the scoreboard. It lives in a crowd that turned a European venue into something that felt like home. It lives in a player who stayed after the defeat and gave her people the connection they came for instead of retreating from the weight of what had just happened. It lives in Leylah Fernandez saying plainly and without ceremony that Alex is someone you have to go take. And it lives in a woman 7 months pregnant who decided, clearly and deliberately, that 4 hours on a German road was a price worth paying just to be in the room. Those things don't cancel the result. They frame it. They give it a dignity that the scoreline alone could never produce. And they tell you something about what Alex is building that has nothing to do with her current ranking or her win-loss record on clay. She is building a story that people feel personally invested in. That quality is rarer than talent. It is rarer than early success. It's the thing that separates athletes who are followed from athletes who are carried. Stuttgart was one afternoon in April. But what it revealed has consequences that reach far beyond Germany, far beyond this clay season, and far beyond whatever the rankings say at the end of it. She left without the win. She left with something more durable than that. Proof, delivered in the most human terms possible, that wherever she goes next, her people will find her, and when they do, they will make the room feel like home.